Good evening, dear friends, and welcome to a surprising and unexpected episode of the Truth Foragers this evening. My good friend Rick, more on him later, and I were enjoying our evening, except for, of course, we barely know each other's addresses for safety reasons. Um, and I was catching up on some Antiques Roadshow. How about you, Rick? What were you up to?
I was reviewing an old manuscript.
Uh, um, much age to your old manuscript this evening?
Um, Honestly, I feel when the weather is this warm, reading is about as much energy as I can manage.
And you read well. They've always said of you, you're one of the great readers.
It's one of the things they use. Yes, they do say that about me. Um, I hear several people have referred to me as one of the people in the world.
They certainly have, and you certainly are. And it's very much what I like about you. It's one of your great skills.
Mm.
Um, but Rick, we were doing our own things, and I got a call from the boys from the Baltic Star, and asking if you and I could fill in as for a last minute issue they were having. I was excited too. Rick, you took some persuading because you have been busy recently.
Uh, I've been stretched a little bit. Yeah, stretched to my limits. Some might say. Any lesser man might have crumbled under the pressure, but I'm made of stern stuff.
You, you certainly are. And that's another thing they say of you. You're a man of. You're certainly a person of the world, made of strong stuff.
Hmm. Yes, they use the word stern or various terms that basically mean the same thing quite a lot actually,
I've heard the word belligerent thrown around.
and the word arse.
Exactly, often one after another. In fact, well, it's it's a pleasure to see your face, Rick. It's been a while. We know for people that aren't regular foragers, not our closest friends, might not realise. Most of our communication takes place over fax machines.
Hmm.
I like to draw pictures of how I'm looking at the time, facial expressions, but otherwise, it's said that you're awkward with around people's faces, Rick.
Well, it's not so much around the face itself. It's that I have this perpetual feeling that when I'm sitting opposite someone, they might be looking at me.
It's something that could well be happening. I feel. I think it doesn't make you a crackpot to believe such a thing.
And I don't know. People have accused me of paranoia in the past, but those people, frankly, were up to something. So I mean, you can't necessarily trust them.
You can't trust people. I think words of wisdom indeed. For those of you making notes this evening, add that to your list.
Hmm.
Is that one from? I believe, in fact, that's from one of your previous books, Rick. Do you have any other? Before we move on, do you have any other important nuggets of wisdom that you could pass on to our foraging friends this evening?
Well, there is an old expression that you should never believe anything until it's been officially denied. Um, and I think that has some merit when dealing with government.
Mm.
But a lot of us aren't dealing with governments most of the time, if for no other reason than after a while we find that governments stop replying to us. Um, or when they do reply to us, the messages are more of the stop writing to us, please message rather than actually dealing with the substance of the message. Um, I've always found that after your 50th, 100th communication with a government minister, when they get to the stage of just responding with, you know, please stop writing to us, um, a useful rule of thumb is to assume that that is because they're hiding something.
That you were perhaps getting a bit too close.
I often feel that's the case, that I'm right on the brink of some amazing discovery, and then people they block me out. They refuse to engage, and it does worry me. frankly, that these are often people we are supposed to be able to put our trust in. The most trustworthy members of society. They are our journalists, our politicians, our estate agents.
I think I remember you making the news a couple of years ago, actually, from your some of your conversations with MPs. It seemed you got into trouble for using an ancient Mesopotamian method of communication, which you thought might work, but apparently in the current age, people don't like bricks being thrown through windows with notes attached. Very much unlike the ancient times when it was seen as an honour.
To be honest, I felt it was important to try every possible avenue of communication as the I think we're all aware that you can't necessarily trust modern communication systems. You need something more tactile, more real. If you do have to communicate over long distances and your pigeons aren't appropriately trained for the destination, then realistically we have to deal with things like fax machines and telegrams. But going beyond that is extremely dangerous. High-end electronics can be problematic, particularly those that rely on those digital components that you can't easily understand just by looking at them with the naked eye. It is a problem. It is a worry, and I mean I know you've blundered into your own troubles with the law over various allegations over the years, all of which were completely unfounded.
Oh, that's what the official outcome suggested. Yes, and I don't wish to talk too much more on them at this point.
No,
I'm under recommendation to not do so.
uh, yes, I think for both legal and moral reasons, it would be better if we didn't discuss them in detail.
I think it's a very wise thing, but thank you for bringing it to my attention. I do have some paperwork to complete in the next couple of days regarding that, so thank you, Rick.
Hmm.
A true friend, a true friend.
Uh, it is my way.
Well, dear friends watching as well, you may not be as close a friend to me as Rick, but that does not mean that we don't appreciate you viewing. Thank you so much for joining us at this last minute. It's a joy that we have such a dedicated fan base. We have literally tens of people who have communicated with us over the years, and we appreciate each and every one of you. Those of you that are part of the Truth Foragers members society, you should all have received your tinfoil roll along with directions for the new style hat, which is gone. I quite like it, Rick. It's jaunty.
I mean, it is obviously that's not the purpose behind the new design. It's a much more effective design, but I think it can be quite appealing to look at. Yes.
I think just because you don't want the government to get the brainwaves in on you doesn't mean you can't look jaunty and cool while doing it.
And I think a bicorn hat will never go out of style.
I think it's been proven down the years. It's always there, just bubbling under fashion, ready to jump out. And I think 2024 is the year.
Hmm.
Um, it's wonderful, Rick. You you've added something to the membership pack this time round, which I wasn't so sure about, but I think it's been going down well.
Um, yes, I felt that one of the weak areas of the membership pack, as originally issued, was that um, we hadn't provided any of the non-static writing paper. People need
Okay.
to make notes in on non-static paper for obvious reasons, so that government agencies can't use space satellites to detect your handwritten notes. And I was concerned that some of our viewers might not have access to the appropriate machinery to degauss their paper stocks. So I felt it was necessary to insert some blank sheets of degaussed paper into the packs.
I think it'll be much appreciated, and I think we've been looking into the numbers. And for those of you that subscribe to us at our more expensive membership level, we might be able to provide a ream of such paper, Rick.
Certainly, the degaussing machine is more than capable of doing that. It it's capable of completely destroying anything electronic. So I'm sure it would cope on entire reams of paper. Yes.
Splendid. So that's something to look forward to for those of you that are looking for an excuse to upgrade your membership. I think that's enough in itself, to be honest. It's worth the extra £300 a month in the paper alone.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I think it's an essential part of the toolkit.
Wonderful, wonderful. For the for those of you dear friends that have not been here before, um, we we run through a certain process here this evening. Rick and I have many years between us in snuffling for truth truffles here on the Truth Foragers, and we're bringing two such matters to you this evening. We'll spend 20 or so minutes discussing a case that we've been looking into over the years. Maybe we've spent years or months looking into it. And then at the end of it, we will offer it up to you, dear viewers, and we will answer ourselves whether, after our postulating and our discussions, whether we believe that this is indeed a true case, or whether we remain sceptical that maybe it is indeed just a myth or a legend that can't totally be proven. But we open it up to you as well, dear friends. If you click on your son, I believe our friends at the Baltic Star have been able to add our two, I believe, and I remain sceptical at the last minute. So please feel free to join in as you see fit. Um, Rick, so we have just the two this evening. Oh, thank you, already half size. I believe also. It's nice. I'm a believer myself. Rick is a more sceptical man, I'd say, but I'm gonna go with world weary. He's seen many things over the years, Rick.
So many things.
So many things. These two, we had a discussion about them this week, actually, even though we didn't think we'd be bringing them this evening. And this first one, Rick, is one that you spent a strangely large amount of time on.
I don't do anything strangely.
Wow, that is very, very, very true. Um, but it doesn't surprise me for a man who is suspicious of electrical and technical ways of communication, aside from fax machines, of course.
Mm-hmm.
It seems only fitting that you would find interesting this first case, the case of the whistling postman.
Ah, yes, the whistling postman. So this one is a story that was presented to me like a little mystery, just a local mystery that seemed to baffle people, and it was one of those that gave people a little bit of a chill, but it more confused somebody. And there are people who know my interests and my approach to the world, so they asked if I could take a look into it. And I didn't think anything of it really, not initially. I'm sure this must have happened to you as well, where people have approached you and asked you to look into something that they find baffling, but in reality you have quickly disabused them of that notion and pointed out how ridiculously naive they were.
Very, very much so. Often, once you delve behind it, you can see the conspiracies right there looking you in the face.
Hmm.
People think there's some suspiciousness, some confusingness in letters, documents they've received, but maybe a voting slip. A friend of mine brought to me their voting slip and uh, a, a slip for their latest council tax and so on and so on. They were confused about certain things, but it was very simple. After a mere 30 hours or so perusing the documents, you could see the repeated numbers all over the place. It all added up to 34.
Hmm.
And it was for someone like us, it's obvious to see, but not everyone does, Rick.
This one in particular, I assumed would be um, badly reported or badly understood. Um, so essentially, the key thing here is the whistle, um, not so much the postman, though it is a postman. I think in every case, it appears that sometimes there are people have this feeling that their world has been upended in some way. Something critically important has happened for for them in their lives, and it is a little bit surprising that the rest of the world goes on seemingly unaffected. Um, I hear it when people talk about waking up on the morning of their driving test, or when they're expecting their exam results, when they're going to um, an event that's of critical importance, like their wedding day, or something like that, and they seem a little bit startled that the rest of the world seems so unimpacted by something which is so important to them, so critical to their future. And it turns out that one thing they noticed was that on those mornings the postman would come along whistling as if it was just another day. In fact, as if the postman was unduly cheerful. But the suspicion had begun to arise in a few of these people that the postman only whistled on days that were of great importance to the person hearing the whistle, which struck me as the kind of thing it would be easy to believe was true because you only noticed the whistle when you were wondering how he could be so cheerful,
Mm.
for example. How could he be so calm, so relaxed? Um, and so I assumed I would rapidly be able to rule this out. And I naturally set about conducting an experiment, a test to see if this was true. And it was at this point, of course, that I asked you to help me construct an experiment.
It was when you came to me, it was a very interesting proposition that did take my fancy, because I, like you, had some suspicions about it. Um, I'm sure we've all caught the bus from time to time, and people will always say, "Oh, the bus is always late. Oh, the bus. Every time I catch the bus, it's always late." And it's been proven often that it's not. That maybe it's late only for 1 or 2 days a week, but those are the days that people remember. People
Hmm.
don't remember when it's on time or when it's a minute or two early. It's just when it's late and it affects them. So when you came to me, Rick, with your own misgivings and your own uncertainties, I was immediately fully on board with uh, putting together a good old-fashioned Truth Foragers experiment. Um, I feel like the last experiment we'd held together was going to the site of the of that pub, that burnt down pub, to try and get a drink from the landlord's daughter. We hadn't done an experiment together since then, really. So it's nice to get back on the wagon. So it was.
Oh, so to speak, yes.
The the experiment was. It didn't need to be complicated, but it needed pre-planning to orchestrate important days for each of us within a fortnight's timescale, which meant that, well, first and foremost, Rick, we had to get you married.
Yes, that's absolutely right. We each picked two events that would sort of be sufficiently impactful. Um, One of them was when I realised I might already have won the Reader's Digest prize
Oh,
draw, and the other
happiest
was,
day
as
of
you
your
rightly
life.
say, my wedding day.
Hmm. Also, joyful enough as a day.
Yes, obviously it was arranged at very short notice, um, and the the bride was a little bit surprised at how urgently it had to be assembled, since I hadn't actually met the woman when we started this experimental track.
Well, it's a blind test, really. It's important that if she'd caught wind of it for too far in advance, it might have affected the results in some way.
That's right, and obviously we needed to find someone who would be willing to go through with a marriage of convenience at short notice. So we found a young woman who was an immigrant from Wales, and sure enough, she was happy to go along with it.
Did you ever receive back a response to your proposal from Darcy Bustle at all?
Not so far, but now that I'm a married man, it's becoming um, more inconvenient if she actually does respond in the positive.
It is true, but um, it would still be interesting to see if she acknowledged your existence.
I mean, there is still hope. Put it that way.
Both those days of yours were beautiful days, it must be said, and we'll go into the results more shortly. Um, I myself had lower um, lower importance on my days. There was one was a day where I had one of the accusations against me quashed,
Hmm?
which is a wonderful day. I didn't have to create that day; that was happening already.
Mhm.
Um, the other day was when it turned out that a, a Nigerian millionaire was giving money away.
Oh, fantastic!
I know, and people often say people don't believe it, Rick. All these millions that have been lost. I dread to think how many millions and billions have gone over the years.
I mean,
People thinking it's a scam.
it's weird. Honestly, it is weird that people would reject such a frankly generous offer from a place as renowned for its decency as Nigeria, um, and at the same time seem absolutely convinced in the validity of things like, political parties in this country, all of which are essentially fictional. It seemed astonishing.
Well, it just meant there was more available for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and actually, I haven't chased up with you after this. Did you in fact receive the money that was promised?
It's on my way. It's on its way. It's going to go into my accounts within the next 3 weeks.
Oh, excellent. That's good. I'm pleased for you.
It is. It's interesting. I don't know how. I don't have a bank account. Of course, neither of us do.
Hmm.
All my money is kept in secret locations. Some buried, some stashed away, some in a whole range of uh, locked up boxes in different stations around the country. But we spoke in good faith,
Hmm.
and as you say, more trustworthy than political parties.
Oh, absolutely. More trustworthy than almost anything, I would think.
I think so. So between us, we had 4 days of life changing days,
Hmm.
and we had 6 days, 6 normality days, and we threw in those 2 weeks. We threw in another 4 days of slight importance, I suppose.
Hmm.
I went to get new shoes one day,
Ah,
which was one of the days. I know you had similar level importance days, Rick. Just a sort of a baseline day, I suppose.
yes, yes. I mean, days I was doing something that appealed to me, something that was potentially exciting or interesting, but not something that would in itself be shocking. Um, I took the opportunity to open a parcel of notes sent to me by a German academic,
Oh,
and going through those was a particularly pleasing day. And I also chose a specific day to go and purchase some cod roe for lunch, which is a particular favourite of mine.
so I think we could all agree, and dear foragers watching as well, our lovely snufflers, I'm sure you could all think of similar days for yourself. So if you do want to carry out the experiment later on, after you hear our results, please do so. Choose wives carefully, I would suggest though.
Hmm. Yes, I mean it does. Some of the decisions could be life changing in good ways or bad ways. I mean, Keris, to be fair, has adapted to being my wife quite well.
It's not surprising. I met her for the first time at the wedding, and she is an an interesting looking, fascinating lady.
Hmm. Yes, and we, I mean, we are still obviously very close. We communicate most weeks.
Exactly. You bought her a fax machine as a wedding gift.
I did, and then an instruction book on how to use a fax machine.
Mm. And I believe she taught you a couple of words in Welsh as well, which is wonderful. So I think it's going
She did.
beautifully.
Yes, she taught me a little bit of Welsh. Not intentionally, I think, but she did teach me a little Welsh.
It's, I'm glad that something positive came from this dark and terrifying experiment, Rick.
Absolutely. But it is perhaps now time that we share the results of our experiment because essentially, on our initial review, it was found that there wasn't a direct correlation. Immediately, it became clear that the postman whistled on days that were not expected to be particularly important and did not, at least within our individual earshot, um, on some of the days we thought would be momentous. And it was then that we started to piece together the evidence. And I think when I realized that I had not, in fact, won the Reader's Digest prize draw,
Mm.
but that was a day when the postman whistled, whereas he did not on my wedding day. When I discovered that the the fishmonger was out of Cod Row on the day I was planning to buy it, which was a day that he whistled, but he did not whistle on the day I examined the packet of notes. It transpired that the postman only whistled if the day was going to go worse than anticipated.
It was a it was a dark term, I think. That he almost like a bad omen. He was bringing the bad omens. It's something you could almost. By the time we were approaching the end of the fortnight, it was with trepidation I would
Mm.
listen for the postman. It was fear instead of a happy, joyous occasion. It was um, it was something to dread. The postman. I think I've kept this quiet until now, Rick, and I don't know if I share it as friends
Mm.
and in hope that we can find the truth together. Um, but for me, the nights, the mornings that he whistled, the days that went badly, um, he indeed visited me as a sleep paralysis demon, sat on my chest, whistling directly at me.
Mm.
Now, I am a man who suffers from such things, as you know, Rick, and maybe those that don't aren't visited by the portent of doom that is the whistling postman. But some truly terrifying nights. Do you suffer yourself, Rick?
I don't suffer from that particular debilitating misfortune. I wouldn't say I don't suffer. I suffer from other things. Just the other day, I stubbed one of my toes on a table. Um, but um,
Government conspiracy.
if someone will explain to me why the table legs are where they are, but that's beside the point. I feel most strongly that it must be a more profound experience, given that you are susceptible to this kind of unpleasant experience. Um, and it must make the whole thing even more terrifying. Though even for me, I started to fear the postman's whistle. Hearing it made me believe that my day was going to take a dark turn.
You'd, in fact, you'd said to me that morning where you'd gone out, where you were going to go out for the codro. Um, as we were spending time together, of course, during that time for the experiment, and as I turned up to the house you'd chosen to rent for the experiment, um, when I turned up to your door and you were ashen faced and concerned that he had whistled, I knew there would be no Codro that day, Rick.
Mm. I I mean I must frankly applaud you for not giving away the secret, because I set off to the fishmonger that day convinced that there would be codro, and when I returned carrying, well, frankly, the roe of a very different species, I was dismayed.
As anyone would be, Rick, as anyone would be. Um, was the was there anything in the postman's whistle for you that was it the same whistle? Was it different every day? Was it a tune that you recognised?
I did not personally recognize the tune, but I don't have an ear for music. I believe, however, it was the same one every time I heard it. And I don't know if that is in itself part of the mystery, or is simply the fact that with current government funding and budget cutbacks, there simply may not be enough training time to teach our postmen a second tune.
that, that's certainly very, very likely. Um, Having a whole repertoire, of course, is not a postman's responsibility.
I think, based on our findings, we would prefer it quite greatly if postmen were to stop whistling altogether.
Maybe perhaps we would all have better days in that regard.
Well, it isn't possible without selectively muting postmen to identify whether or not um, the whistle is merely presaging a bad day or is in fact causing one. But well, when I proposed that that we damage a postman to the point where he could no longer whistle, you quite rightly shot me down on that one.
You have to have standards, I guess, and I know that you enjoy getting your tools out and going to work on situations, but it didn't feel like the right way to go about it, Rick. Especially as I had just had the day before had well, I'd receive my good news, the quashing of the case against me.
Mm.
It felt like the wrong time to retread such things with you.
Yes, yeah. I think possibly there comes a point, um, perhaps, where it it is true that discretion does become the better part of valor in some instances.
I would I would fully agree with you, Rick. So our research, you've already started writing it up into one of your pamphlets
Hmm.
that should be made available to members at the lower and the higher tier. Um, do you? Is there enough in what we've done? Is there enough in the research to suggest that there is such a pattern in the whistling postman? Should people take it as read that as in Red Sky at Night, Shepherd's Delight, whistling postman in the morning, the day's warning?
Uh, I think um, there probably does need to be a wider level of research done. We don't, for example, know if the effect is largely local
Mm.
or if it's national or global. Um, most societies around the world have some form of postman. Most societies around the world have some form of whistling.
Mm.
So it might well be that it is a global phenomenon. Um, I think for me, it's something that we can definitely expand upon, but that shouldn't stop us from coming up with a conclusion with regard to our own evidence
Mm.
um, for our own local story. After all, it wasn't just us. A large number of people indicated that the whistling postman whistled on days that were momentous.
It's just perhaps we must look into the fact that perhaps people's momentous days are maybe a portent of future misery.
Uh, it may be true. And, a mathematician would say there is such a thing as regression to the mean, that
Mm.
your momentous days may often prove to be more disappointing than you expect simply because of your expectations for them. Um,
As the great philosopher Alanis Morissette once said, it's like rain on your wedding day.
uh, yes, yes. Something I have now experienced firsthand.
It was still a beautiful day. I just wish we'd paid for a gazebo and not just stood in a field.
I think, given the torrential downpour, that would probably have been better, especially since uh, the arrival of dark clouds and some lightning meant that we couldn't shelter underneath the trees.
I, it, I think that I'm one for the dramatic, and I think that her makeup really struck a chord as it ran down her face. It was quite exciting in certain ways.
Hmm. Yeah, and revealed not only a face but a facial expression I hadn't seen before.
It's very true. So, on the back of all that, dear Rick, my dear married Rick,
Hmm.
in the case of the whistling postman being the portent of doom or the bringer of joy, um, do you believe or do you remain sceptical?
Well, in this instance, I have to say I find myself a little bit on the fence. The evidence we gathered was impressive, especially over such a short period of time. But I am concerned that when we initially set out to test this, we built a test to prove one thing, and that one thing did not necessarily turn out to be right. So we then took the evidence we had and attached it to an alternate theory.
Hmm.
And that feels like we'd need another test. I think the evidence is compelling, but we'd need to test again. Um, so, for the time being, I think I remain skeptical.
I think it's a responsible approach for a man who now has new responsibilities in his life, such as a wife. Uh, for me myself, I've seen the man sat upon my chest. I've seen your wife with rain streaming down her face. I've seen the disappointment in your face at the lack of cod roe. So for
Hmm.
me, in the case of the whistling postman, but I think it's the reverse of what people originally believed. I believe. I believe that he has power. The whistle has great, uh, a great momentous power over people's days. I believe,
Okay, a split decision.
as they often are, and I think that's why we get on so well.
I think it is. It would be suspicious, frankly, if we concurred on everything.
Exactly. One thing we can agree on is the need for a 3 minute break, Rick. Let's take a short break, and shall we return for one more myth this evening?
One more, definitely.
Wonderful. Right, dear friends, we are vanishing off for a minute. Please don't go anywhere. We shall see you all soon. We'll be back with more Truth Foragers.
Excellent.
Right. Welcome back, dear friends, to this evening's mysteries here on the Truth Foragers. Um, I am Dickie Waghorn. With me is my good friend, colleague, and married man, Rick Bishop. Rick, um, how does Keris feel about our adventures together? I hope she isn't too intimidated by our close relationship. After all, I've seen you in person 7 times this year, which is more than she will.
Um, the the simple reality is that I have not discussed in detail with her what we do.
Mm,
Um, I'm
very
not
wise.
sure she's psychologically equipped for it, to be honest.
It did seem that way. I did wonder how you would get on, seeing as she's such a big fan of Love Island.
Um, it does appear that she and I have different interests. Um, I was a little disconcerted by the fact that I discovered she speaks English and Welsh. English most of the time and Welsh when angry,
Mhm.
but she seems to neither have knowledge of nor any particular interest in most of the languages that I'm familiar with, which is a little bit surprising, I suppose, um, because my interests cover quite a lot of languages, and she has no interest in any of them. I mean, even if Hittite and ancient Egyptian didn't interest her, you'd have thought Syriac or possibly Sumerian would appeal.
And for me, even the most basic of people would at least have a passing interest in Latin, as it's such an important language for modern European.
De minimus.
It's it's upsetting, but I'm sure you'll be able to find many things you have in common over the coming years and years and years that the two of you will enjoy together.
I I hope so. I hope we will. But as far as she's concerned, um, you and I are members of a caving group.
I think I've heard of those actually.
Hmm.
Yeah, the Perthshire potholers. It's
It
rare that
it
we go
is.
to Perthshire though.
Well, as I understand it, there are caves elsewhere. I rationalised this by, while it's not technically true that what we do is caving in the traditional sense, um, we dig deep, unearth secrets, and
Mhm.
occasionally go below ground to investigate ancient, dusty places. So it seemed a reasonable facsimile of reality.
And I do like wearing tight spelunking outfits of an evening.
And head torches are an essential component of what we do.
Oh, often two at once, just in case the first one runs out.
Absolutely.
Um, Dear Rick, we have one more myth this evening.
Hmm.
It's one I'm very excited by because it is the local angle. You know how much I love the local angle.
Absolutely.
Um, for those viewers that don't know, we count our locality as Kent. We won't say exactly where in Kent we actually live, but we have been known to drink in a town called Faversham, and we know certain information about towns and villages around
Hmm.
Kent. Tonight is another one that ties directly into Faversham, which is a rarity for us. We've looked into it on occasion with the distinguished gentleman, of course, most
Hmm.
famously. But tonight we're looking at a certain building in town that has brought with it a lot of mystique, certain horror stories, children and teenagers betting each other, daring each other to enter,
Hmm.
homeless men going missing,
Hmm.
and much more. It is the case of the forgotten amusements, Rick. Please, why don't you explain to the our dear friends more about this building, the background?
Oh, well, um, yes, I think that's quite a good idea, actually, since you've taken the lead for the most part on the investigation here.
Mm.
Perhaps I should pitch in first with some understanding of the nature of the place. This is an amusement arcade, a penny arcade, as they used to be called, which existed for many years as a working arcade on one of the one of the main streets in Faversham. It's a building that I have walked past countless times, um, and when it was a working arcade, I of course found it too brightly lit to really appeal to my personal tastes, and frankly, the level of of noise in there was distracting. So it wasn't really my sort of place. However, quite a few years ago now, it fell on hard times and closed down. And I thought very little else about it, apart from the fact that the building had stood empty for years. I didn't really consider it all that much of an interest. And then you brought something to my attention, which, well, it piqued my interest rather significantly.
So it is a building that has stood empty for some time now. Um, it did enjoy a few glorious years where the large building would see up to four um, customers at once being served with trays of hot tea and coffee by servers inside. Um, but those glory days of three or four slightly drunk, miserable looking characters inside have indeed long gone, and years ago the amusements fell on hard times and closed. Um, it was a couple of years ago where suspicious things started to happen. Most namely, they in the idea they said it was zhuzhing up the town, making it a bit more attractive, but they covered the windows so that no one could see inside.
Mm.
They did it with an artistic look to make it look more appealing. They said, but suddenly, Rick, there was no way for anyone to see what was going on inside. Always, and making something opaque, as the government often do, of course, is the first sign of that something suspicious is afoot.
If you ever encounter something which you cannot clearly see what's going on, then it's almost always true that what is going on is nefarious.
Nefarious indeed. Um, since then, there's been. I think what drew me to look into it more was other things around that. Um, it's it's got a front that is undercover, and for a while, quite understandably, certain homeless gentlemen have been sleeping there. But
Mm-hmm.
every time they have, after a certain amount of time, have vanished. That people would not know what had happened to them, where they'd gone. Um, Youths would be out smoking illegal substances in the streets at night, taking cover from the rain, perhaps underneath the welcoming branches of the amusements frontage.
Mm.
Um, and again, people would they would talk of incredible things they had seen that could not be explained by the sane mind. These things just started to add up to me. There's, as we always say, where there's a smoke, there is indeed a raging inferno, Rick. And this is when I finally got you involved.
It is. It is often the case that one of us finds a matter curious, but it isn't until we both start examining things and bouncing ideas off each other that we suddenly begin to realize quite how deep the rabbit hole might go. And this particular rabbit hole initially looked like it went somewhere, I suppose, fairly trivial, but as we as we looked into it more and more, the questions kept piling up. There were disappearances. Um, there were for a while the whole area was, as you say, all of the windows were blocked off with paper internally. But I think what caught my attention the most is when those pieces of paper were torn down and replaced with semi-permanent um, posters stuck to the inside of the glass, which depicted, truthfully, very misleading things. On one, there was, I think, a big pile of books printed, and on the other, some fresh fruit printed. It these were not indicative of the contents of the now supposedly empty shop.
I think this is where our investigations moved on from 21st century matters, looking at how things have been in the last 20 years there. Um, because such things, books and the fresh fruit, of course, I don't think anyone that had been to those amusements in the last 30 years had read a book or eaten fruit, quite frankly.
I
Uh,
would be surprised.
but once you start delving back through the records of Faversham, an old town, a market that's been there a thousand years, uh, it was indeed the case as we delve back that on the site there has been both a bookstore and a grocer's, and in both and more, terrible things have happened. That we started to look as to whether the local council were giving a warning or trying to scare people off, Rick.
Um, I think some people find the sight of books and fresh fruit and vegetables quite terrifying.
Famously in Faversham, yes.
Yes, it is scary for some people to be confronted with those images. So for the same reason that those individuals would be repelled by the thoughts of libraries, bookshops, and the green aisle in the supermarket. Um, it's a good way of warning them away without actually having to put a sign up that would alarm the average passerby. And that did raise the question: if these were warnings, if these were deliberately intended to keep the citizens away from the shop, then what horror might dwell within that would necessitate such treatment?
Um, we started looking through the records from the building. It was quite often we follow a process. We're good at the process, or at least I follow the process, and then you find ways to circumvent the process using old rulings from dusty tomes quite often. But um, I managed to get the old documents of the building. You pored over them for hours at a time, looking through old owners, looking through the floor plans and the changes in floor plans. And there were definitely patterns there that were confusing, were suspicious, that suggest that perhaps there's more to the amusements over the case of Faversham history than we could ever have expected. That
Mm.
we just went from a place where uh, veggies and book readers feared to tread, and vice versa, into something much wider reaching.
I think we both felt that the time had come to effect entry to the premises and see
Mm.
it for ourselves. And naturally, in this country, every building is owned by somebody, and it seemed logical that we should contact the owner and arrange to view the property. We concocted a story that would imply that perhaps we were interested in purchasing it, and we expected to hear back fairly swiftly. But the message we got, of course, told us that access to the building would not be granted under any circumstances, which seemed ludicrous for an empty high street property that could be reused as a shop. So we had to move on to effecting an entry without strictly having the necessary permission.
It's fascinating to me that a property in town of such a size that could be used for many things and would uh, take a decent rent, especially for those willing to do it up. Um, that such a property that's been empty for so long is not viewable at all. That it is not up for rent. That there is no way to uh, have a look around or to make a deal with the property.
Hmm.
It's incredibly suspicious, Rick, and so it was with great excitement as we ordered extra batteries for our multiple head headlamps,
Hmm.
and you gathered your tools. Um, I was looking forward to the entry, Rick. I felt like we were doing some proper snuffling.
Hmm. It was it was something we carefully scoped out the property, looked at maps and plans and you know, aerial photographs. We were able to identify two possible entryways, one through the front and one through the back. Um, we chose a very quiet time in the middle of the night, just after the last group of recreational smokers had departed for the evening. Um, and so I think it was quite disappointing to us when we discovered that the front door was in fact unlocked and open, and we could just walk straight in.
I was um, I was already heady from the haze of whatever it was they offered me. It was something new to me. It wasn't what I was expecting.
Hmm.
Very different to my father's woodbines growing up, of course.
Well, yes, I think to be fair, um, if you're used to smoking tobacco that's mostly made of tree, then it's probably a bit of a departure.
That's true, but I had a sudden overarching love for drum and bass and the need for cheesy balls.
Ah, yes. I do remember you mentioning how desperately hungry you were for snacks several times during that night.
I've never been so hungry before or since. I put it down to the excitement of the evening.
And it was um, a thrilling moment, I think. I mean, despite the slight disappointment of how easy it was to gain access, once we opened the door and stepped inside and lit our head torches and started looking around, I'll confess I was truly quite excited to see what we would discover. The creaking old wooden floors,
Mm.
the that sort of curtain almost of fine dust particles hanging in the air. It was an atmospheric place.
I myself fell face first over the meter high pile of takeaway menus and discarded letters inside the letterbox.
Yes, I mean, not only were they substantial in terms of height, they also, admittedly, once you'd kicked them, spread out over the floor and posed a slip hazard for the rest of our investigation.
It did make me realise, looking through some of the old, just in case there were clues, of course, um, how much the local Chinese takeaways have put their prices up since lockdown. A conspiracy
Yes,
in itself, I would say.
I, that certainly is worth investigating, and the almost layer by layer archaeological findings of the changing faces of candidates for local elections on
Mm.
beaming out from shiny leaflets was certainly quite compelling.
I would say most of them I've never seen around town at all.
No, I think honestly, um, it's a it is a shocking thing how rarely the local councillors and the local MP is actually present. But then, as I understand it, that's part of perhaps a broader conspiracy. I think that's true in many places.
I feel one for a whole night special, I would suggest at some time, whereas we have deeper and darker things to look into right now.
Mm.
Uh, Mostly the fact that my head torch did not work that evening.
Yes, I mean, it worked intermittently, as I recall. It worked when you turned it on,
Mm.
but then you complained that it was glaring in your eyes and turned it off, and then
Mm.
complained that it wasn't working. I
Oh,
I suspect there was something odd about the tobacco.
it's just I had I just felt the urge to start throwing shapes. I couldn't
Hmm.
quite understand if something was not right, and I feel it affected my evening. But I think we still managed to snuffle well in the 46 minutes we had in the building.
And when we finally learnt the truth, I think, well, it startled me quite a lot, and I recall honestly thinking that this was going to be one of the most alarming things I'd ever seen. And I glanced across at you, and I think it was about 40 seconds later, the same feeling slowly dawned upon you. You weren't reacting quite as quickly as usual.
No, I think I was tired. I think I'd not eaten well that day. I think it was catching up on me by that point.
That would certainly explain your almost incessant demand for snacks.
Very, very much so. I was very hungry that evening. That's what
Hmm.
I remember. I I do remember that you dragged me away from the slightly mouldy platter of digestive biscuits and a cold mug of tea that had been left for the last decade or so.
Um, I felt, though, obviously, there is reason to believe that possibly any harm those biscuits could have done you would have then automatically been repaired by the antibiotics they were clearly carrying. Um, I don't feel the taste would have done you any favors.
Uh, I am very much a taste man.
Mm. And it's not so much the age of them, you understand. It's more that I noticed they were generic supermarket owned brand ones.
That is the problem. Amusement arcades rarely use the luxury items.
No, no, I think that's a fair assessment. Um, but when finally we did find ourselves standing overlooking the, well, what was to be the focus of our investigation, I found it quite hard to explain. I mean, at first it looked simply like a, well, to me, a hole in the floor.
Hmm. Well, that's because it was a hole in the floor.
Absolutely. I'm not disputing the description. It's just, it looked like a hole in the floor, but it didn't look like a hole in the floor that was rotten, where floorboards had fallen through or anything. It just looked like a perfectly round hole in the middle of the floor, um, which alarmed me a little bit because as I approached the edge of it, shining the torch down, there didn't seem to be any obvious bottom to it, nothing at the bottom of the hole.
I think what was interesting to me was that there was a roll of carpet next to it, as if they'd been covering it with some sort of rug for some time,
Hmm.
and but had just whoever was the last in there had decided that it wasn't worth doing anymore. That it was no longer worth hiding. That they were going to open it up because people had lost interest in the building. That people just since the books and the fruit would scare away anyone of note in Faversham, that they didn't need to hide the hole anymore.
It's a disturbing thought that there is a hole like that in the ground floor of a building like that. Um, and at the time, I mean, we stood there for a while looking down into it, and we did talk about whether or not we should. we should leave and return with some of our more adventurous gear. We hadn't thought to bring
Mm.
ropes and climbing harnesses and things like that on a simple investigation of a building in a high street.
Well, of course, I did rush off for a while. You thought I was going to get equipment, but I was just chasing down the bunch of youths to get another one of their cigarettes.
Yes, that does explain why when you returned and I asked if you had found any rope and suitable climbing gear, you gave me a sort of lopsided grin and said, "Ah, climbing gear," and then sat down and started giggling.
Exactly. Yes, you misjudged me at that moment. The cigarette must have been a stronger take, maybe a Marlboro Red or something along those types, something that, as a non-smoker, would have knocked me for six, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one possible explanation. Maybe it was unusually high in tar.
I think so. It's,
But there is, I think, another explanation, which is that some evil force emanating from the hole itself had begun to affect your brain.
Now this
And
is very that makes a lot of sense. When I sat there with you, that is definitely when it seemed to reach a peak.
and well, as you can imagine, once confronted with that, once I realized that was possible, I realized that I couldn't trust my own judgment,
Mm.
my own observations. So I insisted that we leave, which you seemed happy to do at the time, um, with the plan being that we would return the following night.
I was very happy to leave because as I sat with my legs dangling over the hole, I my body felt super heavy, like I was being pulled into the hole.
Hmm.
Suddenly, I couldn't raise my head as easily as I could before. My arms were heavy too. And so I think potentially I was saved that evening by you pulling me away.
Well, certainly that was at the time what we considered to perhaps be the dark secret, that maybe something down there was affecting our brains, was messing with gravity or something like that. And it wasn't really until we got back to our base camp, which we'd carefully configured, not far away,
Mm,
um, about 2 hours brisk march from the arcade itself.
mm. Oh, and it
Um,
took us 5.5 hours that evening.
it did, it did, and initially I thought it was the lingering after effects of the cigarette or possibly the hole in the ground, uh, but that did provide us with some very useful feedback information. And I was quite glad, in fact, that by the time we made it back to our tent, it was quite light.
Mm,
Because had it not been, I would not have noticed that your socks were torn at and shredded as if by claws.
mm. It was something that I didn't feel at the time. I'd complained that my legs were heavy, and you you seemed to poo-poo it somewhat at the time.
It's, I mean, you're right, and I can only apologize. I have to ascribe it to the effects of the hole itself. Not only did it alarm me rather for reasons I can't easily put into words, but also, as happened with you, it may have affected my mental state.
It was um, it was a horrifying moment, Rick. It must be said, looking down at my clawed socks and the marks on my lower leg.
Yeah, it was. it was a disturbing thing to look at. Um, and I think as the morning progressed, you you returned much more to yourself,
Mm.
and then you were quite alarmed at the damage to what I think was one of your favourite pairs of socks,
I've definitely in the top three,
and certainly among your favourite legs.
but definitely my top two.
Mm. And I think as a consequence, um, we had to seriously consider whether or not it was worth risking going back at all. I mean, climbing down into a dark hole in the middle of the night, which doesn't have an easy observable bottom to its depth, is something that I think both you and I would be happy to do at any time. But knowing there's something down there with sharp claws that will tear at you, that's well, that's a very different thing.
Uh, I did suggest to you that the safest way to return the night after would be to uh, uh, come into contact with those teenagers again, because I felt the special cigarettes they offered me provided me with some protection, and they might do the same for you.
Um, I I certainly wouldn't discount that as a possibility, though I would argue that there is a small flaw in that reasoning.
Hmm.
Um, on the basis that I left the premises completely unharmed and with my socks intact.
Mm. Whereas I, of course, did not. It was I only had one other pair of socks with me, and I was, of course, nervous on that 2 hour walk back into town that
Mm,
following evening, about whether I would be returning to camp again that morning with no functioning pairs of socks, Rick. And I
mm.
think that may have affected my mood somewhat as we headed into town.
Yes, yes, and certainly you seemed more tense than usual. I hesitate to use the term paranoid, but certainly you were jumpy.
I think it is only natural if you've gone into a deserted amusements building the night before. You've powered your way through a huge pile of discarded Chinese takeaway menus that make you realise how much prices have gone up in the last
Mm,
5 years.
yeah.
You've bundled past a whole pile of uh, political flyers full of faces that are elected but you've not seen in town in that time.
Mm,
Immediately you're going to be shaking on the back foot. Add to that the perfectly circular hole in the middle of the floor, the urge to almost be pulled down, and then the clawing at my socks and my legs when we got back to the tent. You would understand my insecurities at that time, Rick, and why I had to stop for a few brisk drinks at the nearby railway hotel.
and I was more than enthusiastic joining you. Um, by the time we had steeled ourselves and ailed ourselves, uh, it was well, it was obviously getting late. It was closing time at the pub. It was time to go and resume our investigation. But this time we were returning with all of the equipment we would likely need. Um, and well, as you might imagine, we walked up to the front door with a degree of trepidation, but also with courage in our hearts to uh, to investigate um, this mysterious happening inside the arcade. But that second night, well, things went differently.
I, the first thing that was different was this time the door was locked, and it wasn't just locked; it was bolted.
Yeah. Yes, it was. Um, it appeared when we examined it as if it had been bolted from the inside.
Hmm. Um, I immediately rushed round to the back, of course, the rear exit, the only other exit in the building,
Mm.
and called you round as I discovered that the back had also been locked from the inside.
Yes. Well, obviously, this was a disturbing turn of events, and equally obviously, we had to make a decision about what to do. But I always carry a set of suitable tools for such circumstances.
Mm.
So I rummaged around inside my pack until I found the half brick that I used to smash the window open and pull the bolts aside.
It was what I liked was as you pulled it out of your pack, a little note came out from your new wife, Keris,
Mm.
wishing you well on your potholing that
Yes,
weekend.
which ironically was rather apposite given what we were planning to do.
It did. It made me giggle a little. At least I think that was what made me giggle a little.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. Though obviously I was concerned that we were getting closer to the hole, closer to the mystery. Um, and I think we were both definitely at the hairs standing up on end moment, weren't we?
Going back to an area you've been to before and seeing such an eerie thing, and then afterwards looking back on the terror of the shredded leg, the shredded socks, I was definitely nervous, and I could see it in you, Rick. You're a man who is often you're not backwards in going forwards, but even you took a pause before you crossed that threshold that night.
I did. I very much did. Um, we knew there was something terrifying in the building. We now knew the building had been seemingly bolted from the inside, so there could be someone or something walking around inside the building as well. Um, I was more nervous than I had been the previous night. Even though I now knew more about what was there, I was in no way relaxed or calm. And I don't think I would have pressed on had I not had such a valiant companion with me.
I try my best, even when I feel fear in my stomach that the butterflies are flapping away. I I feel empowered by being with you, and so maybe we almost tricked each other into heading in that evening.
Mm. Well, the back room, as we went inside, was, if anything, even more dusty and more dilapidated. The little staff kitchen that was there looked, well, a state, as you can imagine. Um, we now had some broken glass on the floor to deal with, but sturdy boots naturally for this kind of work. Um, and we crept inside. I don't remember us speaking much. We were staying as silent as we could to listen for anything that would scare us or inform us of what we'd face.
And of course, it's Faversham, things that could scare you around any corner.
Absolutely. It's an ancient town filled with mysteries, ghosts, and some really quite disturbing fast food joints.
It was I remember there was a movement in the dark that turned out to just be a rat or something like it. But I was so on edge that I flicked my whole plastic of beer all over you, Rick.
Actually, I think that was a good thing. I'd been sort of creeping along rather unfocused, just listening for what was going on, and the sudden shock of beer being thrown all over me suddenly made me come alive a little bit.
You definitely seem more on edge at that point. You seem like you were your A game had appeared. You were very focused.
And I think we all, in a moment like that where the tension is so high, we can get some solace from having a really good shout.
I think so. The the shove wasn't called for
I was
though.
merely encouraging you to move further into the building.
I certainly did that. Um, through the door into the main gambling room, I
Mm.
suppose.
And there, well, there was a hole in the floor.
There was, but it was different to the night before, Rick.
It was. And at first, I thought it was because we were looking from the other side when we first saw
Mm,
it.
of course, yeah.
Um, but it wasn't that.
The size was different. The it's hard to explain so much. It wasn't so smooth, I suppose. And one thing was for certain, it was not anywhere near as deep.
No, it was shining a torch down into it. You could now see the bottom quite clearly, which appeared to be, well, I suppose from that distance, it looked earthen, rocky,
Mm.
um, kind of natural in basic form, not a worked surface in any way. Um, but this time there seemed to be noise coming from it. It had certainly grown a little bit, and as you say, the edge was no longer so perfectly round. One of the flyers for a local Green candidate,
Mm.
um, which had been quite close to the edge of the hole the night before, was now just slightly hanging over the edge of it. Um, and if nothing else, that would have made it very clear that the hole had grown a little bit in the 24 hours. Um, and before we could change our minds, we began attaching ropes to the strongest hard points we could find in the building. The main pipes for the radiators and things like that, and started preparing to climb down into the hole. Um, but even then, I was sort of rather hoping that you might step over the edge first. I was a little tense.
For me, I was having flashbacks from the night before as I sat with my legs dangling over, gazing into the dark abyss that I could not see the bottom. That night before had been an unholy circle. It had been perfectly round
Mm,
and it had gone forever. It had been unnatural. It had been something spiritual almost. But this night was very human. Same hole, same place, but more shorn from the land, with the bottom visible. It's in some ways it should have been more inviting, but in a
mm.
way it was more unnerving, Rick, and that's why I shoved you in.
And honestly, I don't think I would have made my way down anywhere near as quickly
Mm.
had you not done that.
You definitely wouldn't have let out the yowl without
I
that.
think that's probably true as well. Yes. Um, and thankfully, though it was a reasonable fall, my ropes caught me on the way down, and I found myself hanging just below the hole itself, peering up at your face. Um, and I took that opportunity to do a little bit more shouting.
You did. You certainly didn't hold back. There were some words you used that I'd not heard since my days in the Navy.
And Keris has taught me a few things to say in Welsh.
She's taught you well in that regard.
Hmm. Um, anyway, once there, I found myself with the obvious choice of either clambering back up or continuing down, and clambering back up seemed well rather pointless. So I let myself rappel down a little way into the hole, and when I arrived at the bottom, well, when I called up to you, I pointed out that the where I was standing seemed to be an actual passage running across underneath the building.
It was it was unexpected. It was because the passage wasn't in the direction I thought it would be.
Hmm.
It wasn't front to back. It was side to side.
Yes, yes, as if running parallel to the street. It was an unusual thing. I felt.
It was it's strange for such a weird hole, but the only pamphlets that were on the bottom were for the Conservative candidate.
Yes, yes. I mean, I don't know if that's indicative of anything in particular, though I had to assume it might be important. Um, and when you joined me down there, we had a decision to make whether to walk, off towards the railway station or down towards the centre of town to continue our investigations. And either way, we were going to have to unclip from our ropes. Um, and thankfully, as it turned out, we didn't get that far because we froze when we heard the noise.
I think after hearing the noise, there was no way that I was going to do anything other than clamber back up that rope as best as I could
Yeah.
out of that hole.
I think honestly, if the hole's mouth had been just a little bit wider, I'd have been coming up alongside you. It was only because the hole wasn't enormous that I waited for you to climb first. And
It was very brave of you to allow me to go first. That and the fact that I shoved you slightly into the darkness to get up first.
and then stepped on me.
Well, it expedited the activity. It helped us to both get up more quickly.
I don't disagree. Um, and then I started the process of hooking myself on, and as I was doing so and beginning to climb, my head torch caught sight of a monstrosity coming slowly towards me along the passageway. I I didn't recognize it immediately, but it was breathing with this horrible rasp and creeping along slowly with a sort of limp. Its spindly fingers were reaching out and rubbing along the sides of the passage. Um, but it's the face that I remember most distinctly. I charged up the rope as fast as I could, yelling for your help to get me out of the hole as quickly as possible. Um, and well, I think we'd actually both fled the building before I was in a position to tell you what I'd seen.
Mm. I, the impact was soothed by the fact that there were the bunch of teenagers outside who were able to furnish me again with my new favourite brand of tobacco on my way
Yes.
past. But it was still relatively shocking, even in my relaxed state.
Um, we'd I don't know that either of us chose the front door over the back deliberately. We just ran in that direction, and
It felt right. It felt right.
yeah, it was certainly the quickest exit as long as we could operate the bolts fast, and we
Mm.
did.
We did.
But that also meant I was able to just tuck back inside and quickly leaf through a few of those piles of papers.
Mm.
I needed to confirm, obviously, what I'd seen, and sure enough, when I found the right leaflet, I was able to identify that the creature, the monster, the whatever, had in fact stood as a local candidate for the Conservative Party.
It was. It was a candidate that we thought had long gone, that had been deposed a number of years ago.
Well, maybe that's what happens to deposed candidates.
It would certainly explain the nightmares I had the night before, back at the tent with
Mm.
the clawed socks. the in the nightmares, I felt like I needed to. I was caught in this loop of uh, things were opening that I'd had nothing to do with, but I needed to be there for photo opportunities.
Ah, yes. You slept poorly, as I recall, mumbling about oversized scissors, which did sound quite freaky to me, but
I was
it does make sense.
I woke up determined to cut the budget of the local council. That's all I remember.
And I mean, clearly the place affects the minds of those who visit it, because that is not your natural thought.
Very much not. Very much not. Good evening, Comic Bear, dear viewer, new friends. Please join us in snuffling for truth truffles. Please take our guidance tonight and locally look into some mysteries. Why don't you? Um, I, in fact, I'm glad you woke me when you did that night, Rick, because I was halfway through uh, cutting open your T-shirt to open a shopping centre in
Mm.
West Street.
Yes, and I mean, though I didn't have that feeling the first night, I do recall the following night. Um, a, a sort of nightmare in which I was standing on a stage and for some reason um, issuing pronouncements that blamed random groups of people for every problem that
Mm.
afflicted the world, and somehow it didn't seem to make any sense to me. It just filled me with creeping fear that all of the people I was blaming were somehow those who in no way had the wealth, power, or influence to actually cause any of these problems, and in fact, naturally would be the victims of such things. It just seemed bizarre to me and unsettling.
It's it was a terrible experience, and I think looking back, I can understand why the amusements has been closed in the way it has, and although it's very much a venue that could be rented, that people could be allowed to look around for such situations, that is closed off, that is not open to offer, and is protected day and night by youths, keeping the local traveller on the straight and narrow.
Yes, yes, and honestly, even though there is clearly much more that could be learnt there, I am in no hurry to go back.
It's um, it's a dark place. It's a dark place indeed. Um, we, I remember in the weeks after, we tried to warn the people of Faversham of this dark truth,
Mm.
but most laughed in our face and refused to believe in what we'd seen.
It's true. And the couple of local councillors who looked a little pained when I mentioned it to them, they both tried to pass it off as if it was nothing. But one of them did lean in and said, "Look, we've put up these clear warning signs, posters indicating that books and fresh fruit and vegetables are what can be found in this place, which should keep away all of the most curious." And I think the impression I got was that there was nothing more they could possibly do.
In Faversham, if you want to keep people away from something, you suggest that books or fresh fruit are available there.
Exactly. It's the way of guaranteeing no visitors.
What more could they do? I think they're doing the most they can. It's
I
just
think they probably are. Um, and and much as it is not in my nature to give any credit to people um, who work for the local authority, I think on this specific occasion they've probably chosen a reasonably sound approach.
it's clearly a portal to evil, and I think they're defending it in the best possible way they can in the town they're in, and for that I salute the local authorities.
Mm.
Um, I will never get back those evenings of fear or that pair of socks that I lost, but I like to think that our tale could help people to avoid a similar fate.
And if you find in your own town that there is a suspicious building like this, which is clearly but subtly warding you away, um, give it some thought. Maybe you have your own missing local council candidates or former councillors who their absence from political life, either while they were supposed to be doing that job or subsequently, is just inexplicable.
So, my dear friend Rick, in the case of the forgotten amusements
Mm.
that we have seen firsthand, are you do you believe in the sinister power within, or do you remain skeptical?
Obviously, personal evidence has to be considered very weak when compared to the kind of documentary evidence we often deal with, particularly the badly framed and poorly cut together grainy footage in ancient videotapes and the badly preserved newspaper cuttings with half tone shots that were, even when new, out of focus. But in this case, having experienced it myself, I have to say, I believe not just because of the personal experience, but also because so much of it makes sense in the wider world. It explains so many things we see around us.
I think I'm going 2 for 2 tonight, Rick. I am. The first night was fuzzy for me. I'll accept that. I'm working on thoughts and memories that you reminded me of, and looking down at my legs back in the tent after that walk that I don't remember anything of that walk back, but I remember the changes in the hole, the changes in the mood. I didn't see the faces you did, but I did hear the howls and the rantings,
Mm.
the uh, the cries against certain people groups, the call to blame each other.
Mm.
Um, and I think it's very hard for me to do anything but believe. I believe in the evil power underneath the forgotten amusements.
Mm.
A terrifying thought. And you and I both enjoy from time to time a drink in the railway hotel nearby, and indeed we know someone that lives uh, uh, close by to both places,
It's true.
and I fear for their safety quite often. And I feel as long as they spend more time at the railway and less time by the forgotten amusements, hopefully they will be okay.
Well, I'm sure that would definitely help. Though I am conscious of the fact that though we didn't plot out any of the tunnel directly, based on the direction it ran, I think it is possible that the railway or somewhere near to it might be close to its passage.
A, a worrying thought indeed that even fine drinking establishments could be affected by such evil.
But we've had many a drink there without any problem whatsoever. Um, it is it is hopefully somewhere that will be spared the horrors, because if the horrors leak into pubs, well, then we're really doomed.
Well, if the horrors include prices, then the limes opposite is already infected.
True.
Well, my friend, it's been a wonderful evening to sit. We called in last minute. We got to put forward two investigations that have been close to our heart for the last 12 months or so. Congratulations on your marriage once more to Keris.
Thank you.
Uh, she's an interesting woman, and yeah, that's all I can say about her, really.
Um, I think she would appreciate that. Um, I mean, I don't know her that well, but I think she would appreciate that as a description.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about her in the future. Rick, I look forward to our next investigation together. They don't happen often enough.
They do not, and uh, I think we should give thanks at this point also to the boys from the Baltic Star for letting us once again use their channel to put out the stories and spread the word about our important work.
It's nice that we get some residual viewers, those that have maybe been on another channel and have popped in thinking they're gonna see some light-hearted role playing, and instead have had their eyes opened by deep investigative snuffling.
Mm, absolutely, yes.
Well, thank you, dear friends, dear viewers, for joining us this evening. Thank you to Rick, and from Rick and myself, Dickie Waghorn. We thank you for joining us this evening as we snuffle for truth truffles in our foragings. We'll be back at some point, no doubt, over the summer. But if we're not, please support our friends at the Boys in the Baltic Star as they do their light-hearted role playing. Let them have what they have. It's just relaxing for them.
It is.
But until next time, thank you so much. We heartily recommend all the joy you can have in life. But don't take things too lightly because life is important and you only get one. So until next time, cover those brains with foil, check the walls, and get your paper from us. We look after it.
Yeah.
Take care. Sleep well. Good night.
Good night.